Is that the way that I pursue the topic? The right? Is it about the 2 hours length of a moderation that you will be focusing on?
If I answer that question, it takes about 30 minutes. It's a whole workshop.
Okay, so we leave that question open. I would like to highlight a little bit about yourself. I got to know Moritz at one Toastmasters event that we didn't have in our very location, and afterwards we went to a new cafe. So this was special to me. Suddenly, a new guy was sitting next to me. This was Moritz at the very first time he came to Toastmasters. And what I found very peculiar was his interest in feedback, giving honest, giving direct, and giving very constructive feedback. And at that time I was struggling somewhat with the way that we were giving feedback at Toastmasters, because it was a touch too polite, it was a touch too smooth, it wasn't as outgoing as the constructive as I had anticipated it to be for myself, as I like to be very self-critical when being a Toastmaster. So he, for me, was a star in the sky, a shooting star, bringing new energy to giving feedback. So this is my first impression of him. Now that he has become Vice President Education last year and President this year, I am his treasurer, and I carry part of the executive team duty, so to speak, behind the scenery. I'm happy that you're here in that very position. He has grown up in few years only from a starting Toastmaster to the steering committee of our club, so to speak. And one thing I would like to know, because it doesn't mean much to me yet, and maybe to the audience, you said that you were invited to moderate a speech session at the 7 Summit Supporter Day. If this is part of your speech, don't answer it. If it's not, let us know now.
I'll let you know as part of my speech.
Okay, the stage is yours.
So first of all, I have to take a picture of my audience. I do that at every area conference, and it's actually quite fun to see those in a few years. Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, I'm not here today to talk about speaking. You heard just 7 very good speeches, humorous speeches, and I'm not going to talk about theory of how to do them. What I would like to talk about is what Harold is doing today, the breaks and transitions in public speaking. You could also say I would like to talk about moderating an evening. And coming back to the question from Harold, I was invited a few months ago by a guy named Steve Kruger for his 7 Summits Supporter Day to moderate this session. Now, who's that guy? I went up with him to Kilimanjaro, but he's also the newcomer of the German Speakers Association and has been awarded also coaching award. So that was quite an honor for me to being asked to moderate it. For his supporters, they were allowed to present for 7 minutes their program, and I was the one that moderated that session. I will tell you a little bit later the amount of preparation this moderation took. And the learnings from this session, from these months that it took me to prepare for that event, I would like to share with you what I learned there and how to do this within the next 30 minutes. So, what is the role of a moderator, you might wonder? Today we heard already about plane crashes, so I'd like to take this picture that a moderator of an evening is the pilot. He's the one that is guiding all the audience, all the passengers in those rows, 2 columns, while drinks are served and there's some entertainment program. He's the one that is guiding you through it. He's guiding you in a way of emotion, of content, and he's the one that is gluing things together. Actually, there's always a backup. No, you should come prepared. All the speakers have prepared their things, their elements. But you as a moderator, you have the chance to connect those elements, to put some brackets around them, and to show the audience how it all fits together. you're the one here on stage that actually sets the real program. Because you can talk with the organizer a lot, you can talk with somebody who tells you details, but in the end, it's your words on stage that give the announcement of what's going to happen. And that's quite a powerful position that you should prepare for. So my talk today is about how to prepare for it, which elements are there of those moderation, the opening, the introduction of speakers, the transition between speakers, the closing, and that's about it. And we should come up with plenty of time for that. Now, when you have an audience in front of you, like I see you almost, there's some things that you can do to actually lose the attention of the audience. I once attended a session, it was about powerful speaking. And there were two guys moderating it, coming up on stage, jumping in, and the very first words they say, "There's some free seats over there." Now that's not the way to pick up your audience. You might be surprised. Also, another way not to pick up your audience is tell them that they should switch off their cell phones. Nico is not here anymore, but you know what they do at the Schmeestadel when they have a show? How they get people to switch off their audiences? Nico is publicly announcing that he's taking every phone call that he hears personally. Which means, if Klaus' phone is ringing and it's his girlfriend, then I will pick up and tell his girlfriend he's sitting with his wife. So that's a way to include... Yeah, it takes a little while to sing. That's a way to include those elements into your introduction, to picking up the audience. But it's not the way to get them started. Now there's another aspect to it, which is a little bit contrary. It's the aspect that the first words you're speaking when you're starting a session like this, nobody's listening. Honestly speaking, nobody's listening because they all just busy with realizing that there's something starting here, there's something going on. So in the opening, you can get the attention, but your punchline, from a content point of view, your punchline is your second point, your second sentence, your whatever you want to have it to be. The announcement of the cell phone, the joke about it, or something about the program. You can make it formal or informal, any way you want. There's a lot of variety, and that's the wonderful thing about moderation, is that it's not as stressful as speaking, but on the other hand, you have the same elements of beginning, body, conclusion, and so on and so forth. So how do you actually do that? How do you connect to your audience? Well, you can make jokes. That's the easiest way. You can make jokes about yourself. You can notice how you came to being in that role. For instance, with the 7 Summits Supporter Day, I announced them that I'm a Toastmaster, and I announced to them that I went up with Steve to Kilimanjaro. Already connecting with the guy that organized the whole thing, connecting with myself, telling them a little bit about myself. So that's one easy way. A little bit more tricky way is to connect with the audience and the program and tell why you should listen to that program. Why did you come here? That takes a little bit of effort because you have to get to know the audience. And with 50 people, it's manageable, depending on. With 100 people or 500 people, it's not anymore. By the way, who of you hasn't moderated a session in Toastmasters? Who's been Toastmaster of the evening? Okay. So next time we have a meeting in our club, I come to you. Who of you has moderated a session outside of Toastmasters? Well, that's quite a few numbers. I start in the back. Bernd, which one did you moderate?
The Mojito Girl contest.
Okay. Lily?
In an NGO that I'm a participant, Women's Federation for World Peace, we had a meeting with Dresden. Actually, I've had many of them.
Olga?
Actually, it was a conference, and I was the leader of the panel discussion with a team broadband railway in Slovakia.
Okay. That sounds like a long title for something that is not too complicated.
It was complicated.
Okay. Yeah. So you see, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different aspects that you can moderate, and with each of them you have to set a different tone. Maybe for the Mojito Girl contest, you would set a different tone than for a Women's Federation, than for the Slovak Railway Company. And so that's the tricky thing about it, and that's the interesting aspect about it. Now we all have an exercise here. Upcoming after my speech, there's the opening of the award ceremony that is coming afterwards. And I would like you to think about how would you set the first 3-4 sentences when you open this award ceremony. Think about it. How would you do that? There's an applause, I go back, drink a sip of water, and then there's Harold coming up. And what would you say if you were in his position?
I know what we've all been looking forward to.
Yeah, that's the one to pick up the audience and that they ignore. Next one, where you get the real attention.
And the winner is...
Yeah, that's very simple. And the winner is. And the winner is, and then you talk that you will have the award ceremony. So, famous words, and the winner is from the Oscars. Then you can have set already the tone of, okay, this is a ceremony and we're gonna just celebrate. What do you do there? You give your audience a guidance of where am I actually? Am I in the right room? Am I listening to the right people? Is this going to be interesting? Actually, in the first few sentences, your audience is deciding whether they want to listen to you or not. Okay, here we are. We introduced the program. We have the first speaker. Now what's now? You have to introduce the speaker, and you heard today a very, I would say, unconventional way of introducing speakers by doing table topics first. That's a little bit harsh in a way, because the speaker might be nervous and you're giving him the confidence by introducing him. You can tell about himself and what he's going to talk about. But there's one more aspect that is much more important. You start connecting with the audience. For your speaker, you start connecting to him by setting the tone right. If there's a humorous speech, you can make jokes. If it is a serious speech, you can talk more serious. So this is the way of smoothing the emotions for the speaker. And you can do that by talking to the speaker of, hey, what's it gonna be that you talk about? As a moderator, I forgot to mention earlier, as a moderator you have quite a privilege. You're privileged to know the future. You know what's coming. You can know the content of the program by asking the speaker. Very few speakers will not tell you anything about their speech. Most of them will tell you, okay, I'm going to talk about this and that. And later on, when we come to how to prepare for this role, I give you some tips on how to interact with those speakers. You did the introduction, you asked them, like, the emotional setting, you talked about who is speaking, and give maybe a little bit of a teaser. Then the speaker speaks, applause, you come back on stage, and now it's time for the real challenge. You have to introduce the second speaker. And that's why I call it breaks and transitions. Here's the transition part. Imagine, I actually experienced this. I was in Bratislava and I was Toastmaster of the evening. And I prepared speech introductions for each of the speakers, but at the same time I didn't know in which order it was going to be. And it was a reading about a story of a girl being raped, and afterwards we had humorous speeches. Now get that emotional transition. It's actually, it worked out by saying, okay, we're doing a U-turn here. There was no other way. So you have to close one speech and you have to open the other one. And as a moderator, you are the brackets in between, around each of the speeches. So if you have a serious speech and you make a joke afterwards about that speech, the whole message about seriousness is ruined. Although it's just a bracket, it's very important that emotionally the opening and the closing fits to the message. What Silvio was talking about, don't cheat the audience and don't cheat the speaker by giving a bracket around it that does not work and does not fit the content. So one important aspect of preparation is talking to the speaker, because you want to know how the emotions, how the message of that speech is going to be. Now, how to close the whole thing and transition to the next one. You have very little time. You have somewhere between 20 seconds and a minute time. Now, you're all Toastmasters, and you know that within that time frame you cannot talk a lot. So how do you do that? You can listen to the first speech while having in mind the second speech, and listen to things that connect those two. Now, with the rape story and the humorous speech, there's nothing to connect. But still, most of the speeches, you have something that connects one to the other. And I would like to give you an exercise for something you just heard. We had 6 speakers, and we had 6 different topics. And I would tell you now, again, 2 keywords of each speech, and I would like you to think about transitions from one to the other. So we started off with Mother's Shoes, then Tiny Monsters, The Power of The Magic of Family, Surprising Similarities, and Romanian Bus Drivers. Again, Mother's Shoes, Tiny Monsters, Power of Magic Family, Surprising Similarities, and Romanian Bus Drivers. Now pick any of those, and you all heard the speeches, and try to find a connection between one and the other. It's quite easy with Mother's Shoes and Tiny Monsters. But take a second and think about another one. And if you have one, don't be shy. You're Toastmasters. Just say it out.
If you think your mother is the most angry woman in the world, wait until your daughter is born.
So between the mother and the family. Okay, very good.
Once again, sorry. Let the monster meet my mother, and we'll see who will be the monster. Sorry.
All right. Any others?
From big monsters to little monsters.
Yeah.
Or the next speech is going to be surprisingly similar with the previous one.
Very good. You give the title and the content. Now you would have to repeat the title again, because again it's the first sentence. Nobody's listening. They're still with their minds on the very end of the speech. So again, you have a beginning, a body, and a conclusion, even with those 20 seconds. And it might be just 3 sentences. Hello, we heard the speech. This is what we hear again. Here's the speaker. There's another transition that I thought today was quite hard to think about. For those of you who've been to Claire's workshop, at the end of the video you hear the aviation traffic controller saying that they just lost contact with the plane that just crashed. Now imagine that, and afterwards you have a humorous speech. You see, that's the point of being responsible for that emotional transition. If you don't have a joke before that speech, there's no way that the audience will forget that they just heard the end of a plane flying and then start off laughing, and it would create some strange emotional dissimilarity between what you're talking about or the speaker is talking about. So as a moderator, you can take that pun on yourself rather than leaving it to the speaker. So we have the first speaker, we have the transitions, we have the last speaker, and then we have a closing, and you might wonder why I don't spend so much time on closing than on all other things. Well, guess what? The closing is just another transition into a future that you know as a moderator. You might know what's the program next, that there's a buffet waiting outside. And you can announce these transitions and give your audience a guidance to what's coming next and where they can have an orientation. Also, you can take your skills from listening to all the speeches and sum the whole evening up, providing them the red line that you've given them in the beginning. Actually, the beginning is there. Given them in the beginning. So connect from the beginning to the end. Make the brackets around the whole evening. And that is your role as a moderator, to guide your audience through that evening. And we talked already about how to prepare for this. For the 7 Summits Supporter Day, I talked with each of the 7 speakers for about 2 hours about their speech. I prepared for about 4 months, and that was probably the most intense preparation for being a moderator that I ever did. Luckily, as a Toastmaster of the evening, it's not that much of a preparation, but it's more than just speaking with the speaker just before his speech. And I just used the word just, I think, 3 times in one sentence, referring to the intercultural communication. So take this role as an opportunity to train your listening skills ad hoc and beforehand, and prepare. Since preparation prevents poor performance, it helps a lot for your speaker, for your audience. For me, I was asked afterwards whether I do that professionally, and I was quite trembled that somebody actually saw my preparation. And that is something that is worthwhile from my point of view, and I hope it's also worthwhile from your point of view. His Majesty, Harold Mattenberger, thank you very much. If there are any questions,
Questions?
okay, I had it. Yeah, Adam.
Yes, you mentioned that with the film, the way it ended in a very abrupt way,
Yeah.
and we were transitioning to something else. I'm curious, how would you have done that transition?
How would I do that transition? Actually, in this case, noticing that we just witnessed a moment where 150 people died, I would just shut up and have a moment of silence to leave everyone to their own thoughts, and then slowly pick up and transition into something else. But actually, this is such an emotional moment that I feel it should have the space to think about that. Because otherwise people will have that moment no matter what you do. But still, whether you give it the space or not.
Can I suggest something to that?
Yeah.
There's a possibility to turn something positive out of that, so that industry learns something from that. This will never happen again. Could be a statement that gets from despair to hope. From this, I think you could build out again.
Yeah.
Because if you stop complete, it's like if somebody speaks about Holocaust or something like that. You could end up that will never happen again if you all work together. And with this, you bridge to a positive mindset, and you give away the hopeless feeling because you're hopeless. Something like that. My suggestion.
Good idea. All right, then I'm looking forward to see you as Toastmasters of the evening. I hope you can use some of the lessons that I tried to talk about. And looking forward to seeing you at the bar and at Toastmasters. Thank you.